All right, I think it's about time to get started. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for the latest installment of Novel at Home, a series of virtual author events bringing authors to your living room or home office or patio or wherever you're Zooming these days. My name is Kat Leach, and I'm the social media and promotions coordinator at Novel in Memphis. Your support is invaluable to a small business like ours, and we thank you for being with us tonight. So we're thrilled tonight to be hosting a virtual launch party for novelist Lindsey Rogers Cook, whose new book, Learning to Speak Southern, is set right here in Memphis. She'll be joining conversation tonight by best-selling Southern novelist Kristy Woodson Harvey. And as a very special treat, Lindsey's publisher, Sourcebooks Landmark, has provided a prize bundle of Memphis-themed goodies from Novel to be given away to one lucky attendee at the end of our program tonight. So stay tuned for that. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. After I introduce our guests, I'll hide my video during Lindsey and Kristy's conversation. Please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to ask any questions you might have, and feel free to enter your questions at any time during the talk. Lindsey and Kristy will try to get to as many of them as possible towards the end of the program. But I'll be in the chat behind the scenes to answer any questions you have, and feel free to chat with each other as you enjoy the conversation. I'll also be posting links in the chat where you can order Lindsey and Kristy's latest books from novelmemphis.com. Without further delay, it's my honor to introduce tonight's guests. Kristy Woodson Harvey is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of Feels Like Falling, The Southern Side of Paradise, The Secret to Southern Charm, Slightly South of Simple, and others. Her latest, Under the Southern Sky, was released this April. Kristy is the winner of the Lucy Bramlett Patterson Award for Excellence in Creative Writing and a finalist for the Southern Book Prize. She lives in North Carolina with her husband and 7-year-old son, where she's working on her next novel. And then our guest of honor tonight is Lindsey Rogers Cook, who celebrates the release of her second novel, Learning to Speak Southern, today. She is a senior editor for digital storytelling at the New York Times, previously at U.S. News and World Report. Her first novel, How to Bury Your Brother, was published last year during the worst of quarantine, as was referred to a moment ago. This year, at least, she can go sign books in person at real bookstores, even if we have to launch virtually. Lindsey lives in Hoboken, New Jersey, across the Hudson River from New York City. Please join me in giving our guests a warm virtual welcome.
Yay. Oh, thank you for having me tonight, Lindsey. I'm so thrilled to be able to wish you a happy pub day, sort of in real life, and to be a part of your event. This is so great. How are you feeling? How's pub day going?
I feel good. It's stressful for sure. I think I visited every Barnes and Noble in Georgia today, it felt like, and lots of independent bookstores. So that was fun. But yeah, looking forward to more.
Good. That's so great. Okay. So before we get started, you have to tell us, it's the obligatory question, right? Can you tell us a little bit about Learning to Speak Southern?
I would love to. So Learning to Speak Southern follows Lex. She's a linguist. And at the beginning of the novel, she has suffered some trauma and she's had some medical bills that have come up that she can't pay. She's been teaching English around the world, and she's actually in Bali when the book starts. So she calls her godmother back in Memphis, and her godmother tells her that if she comes to Memphis, then everything will be paid and kind of she can start over. So she heads back to Memphis, not too happily. And once she's there, her godmother tells her that every day she stays, she'll get one diary entry from her late mother. So through the diary entries and the people and memories that get dredged up in Memphis, she has to confront her past, her family, and also kind of reestablish for herself what family means and what it can mean for her going forward.
Well, I loved this story. And that is one of my just favorite ways to get to know a character, especially one who's no longer with us, to get to see them through their letters and their journal entries. And I thought that was so well done. So can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to incorporate those journal entries?
Sure. So the idea with the journal entries is that Lex's mother, Margaret, they don't have a good relationship. She was kind of, I think Lex would say, a bad mother, and perhaps the audience would say that as well, or readers would agree with that. She was not that great of a mother, but through her diary entries, we actually get to hear her speak for herself. And we can hear that even though she's beyond the grave, we hear that she really did have a passion and she had kind of a lot of spark. A lot of her diary entries, her voice is very kind of witty and plays with a lot of book puns, which was a lot of fun to write. So I thought it was important both for the reader and also for Lex to experience her mother that way instead of the way that she was when Lex knew her.
I love that. Well, I would love it if it's okay with you, if you would read us just a tiny little snippet. And while you're getting that ready, I was just going to remind the audience that you are welcome to ask any of your questions to Lindsey. I'm going to be moderating the Q&A later. So if you would just leave them in the little Q&A box down below, if you forget and put them in the chat, that's okay, because I'll be checking that as well. But leave them in the Q&A and she'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, so this is going to be from the first diary entry that Lex gets from her mother. So it's set in the 80s in Memphis. Let's start at the beginning, the day our heroine or villain, that's up to you, first heard of the man she will soon think is the love of her life. But remember, in the best pieces of writing, the heroes and villains tend to be one and the same. One fine March day in Memphis, Margaret Green, a bright girl with a cute face and a terrible haircut, sat in the bleachers at her then boyfriend's baseball game with her then best friend, Cami. No, not boyfriend, fiance, a term to which Margaret was still adjusting despite the excitement around her. His name was Dennis, a description that was accurate in every sense of the word. Our young heroine sat with her ring-laden hand hidden behind the cover of an SAT prep book. As long as she maintained her GPA, she was set to be valedictorian, a goal those around her thought made little sense given the ring. But she would rather dream of her speech than admire the dead woman's diamond. She was not engaged to the pitcher of the baseball team or someone equally thrilling. The ball boy, he was her man, her boy, the one who could be defeated by the strength of his own sneezes. She sat on the bleachers, overdressed, for her mother instructed her since double digits to wear a pretty dress whenever a boy would be present and to powder her face and to mind her manners. Her mother had a plan. This was the man her daughter would marry. She hoped that others would judge her daughter not for her address's proximity to Uptown Square, but for her sirs and ma'ams at the end of each precisely worded sentence, a la Gone with the Wind, but Melanie or maybe Ellen, not Scarlett. Her daughter would follow the Henry boy to Memphis State. She would live in the house by Overton Park. Henry hardware would be hers the way a church belongs to the pastor's wife, which is not at all. If a few careful forgeries were all that were required for her daughter to live a prosperous life, then Margaret's mother would do it, no matter how many nights she had to spend huddled over copies of birth certificates and family Bibles and war registries at the library, dip pen carefully poised. She succeeded too, quickly becoming a fixture at the Daughters of the American Revolution and partners with Dennis's mother during tours at the Mallory Nally House. As far as Margaret could tell, her mother's 3 goals in life were: 1, have Margaret entrap Dennis; 2, yell at her husband and daughter as much as possible; and 3, test how many jobs one person could hold at once. Margaret would have sworn her mother took some sort of drug to stay awake all night, but through years of observation, she was fairly certain her mother ran on the stress of having an unmarried daughter and the belief that any man in possession of a good hardware store must be in want of a wife.
I love it so much. It's so Southern. It really is.
You have diary entries in your latest book too. What did you think about having Greer speak beyond the grave?
Well, I thought that was a really interesting parallel, and I think I was nervous about it because I wasn't sure how it would come off. What were you nervous about that? About having, I feel like yours were a little different because there was a different tone to them. I was afraid, I didn't want mine to come off too melodramatic, and that was a little bit of a concern at the beginning. But ultimately, if you want to have a person that's no longer here in a story, then that's kind of the way it goes, right?
For those who don't know, Under the Southern Sky, there's a widower who's reading his dead wife's diary entries. So we get to kind of hear from the wife directly, which adds a really interesting dimension to the plot.
Well, that's really nice, but thank you. But we do not need to talk about me tonight. We want to talk about you. So I want you to tell me, since we are in Memphis tonight, I wish we were really in Memphis tonight together. I love Memphis. Why Memphis? Why did you choose to set this story here? And I think maybe even more, I'm so interested in how, you were writing this book set in Memphis during the middle of a pandemic. I'm sure you were thinking, oh, I'm going to be in Memphis all the time researching this story. Like, how did you overcome those hurdles?
Yeah, so I was thinking that I would be in Memphis frequently researching this book. I was really lucky that I went actually in February 2020, right before the pandemic started. And my mother and I went for a week, and it felt like we went so many places. We were so tired at the end. But in terms of why Memphis, my family has a deep history in Memphis. So my great grandparents lived across the street from Graceland. My grandfather spent his childhood fishing in Germantown. He had a press newspaper route. And then he also met my grandmother at Memphis State, where they both went to school, where he picked her out of a magazine, as he likes to say. My mother was born in Memphis. So I kind of grew up my entire life hearing these stories of Memphis that just made it sound so romantic and kind of different than what I was used to in Atlanta. So I was really intrigued with it because of that. And I wanted to kind of get to know the city better. And I truly fell in love with Memphis while writing this book.
Yeah, Memphis is a great spot. That's one of my favorite places to get to go on book tour, back when we did that. So I noticed there were some real places that you actually feature in the story, like the beauty shop and Crosstown Concourse and some places like that. But what was that line? Was everything real? Did you take some liberties with Memphis? How did that work?
Yeah, so most everything is real. So even the house that's on the cover, it's a Victorian. It's where the godmother Cami lives. It is based off like a real Victorian house with a real address. And Cami also owns a flower shop, and it's based off a location in Cooper Young where there used to be a flower shop. So everything is pretty accurate. I did take a few creative liberties. One is that I had some of the main characters in the 80s storyline going to the same high school, which would probably not have been the case.
Okay.
But everything is pretty much accurate. I thought it was important, since Memphis is so real, and I wanted it to truly live and breathe Memphis. I wanted someone to be able to kind of take the book and walk the streets of Memphis. And I hope that people do that, because it's such a great city.
Yeah, you definitely could really feel Memphis in the pages of the story, for sure. So one of the characters that I really love, since you just mentioned her, I loved the character of Cami, and I thought she was so interesting, and just the idea of this godmother who has so much to teach Lex, and she's also very different from her in a lot of ways, and also just knows a lot of secrets that I think are going to really end up changing Lex's life. Did anyone real inspire her, or was she just a figment of your imagination?
She's just a figment of my imagination. I always loved the idea of really getting to know your mother's best friend, because that's kind of where all the secrets are buried, I think. Yeah. I did get some inspiration for her background. So Charo Henriquez, who's actually on the call here, and she's my boss at the New York Times. She grew up in Puerto Rico, and she was really nice to give me some background information about her own childhood in Puerto Rico that I used for Cami. I really wanted Cami and Lex's connection to be kind of their own. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wanted Cami to be the one who first teaches her Spanish and first kind of ignites her love of language that then kind of takes her through the rest of her life and is one of her main passions.
Yeah. Well, so we have to talk about that. I mean, because Lex and her love of language, and that's really one of the real cornerstones of this story. And, as a writer, I loved that so much and just found it so intriguing and so interesting. And then, Margaret loves language too. And I feel like in some ways that really connects the two of their stories and connects them as characters. But, you're switching back and forth between these two characters and their two voices. And did you find that difficult at all? And how did you keep their voices straight in your mind?
Yeah. So one thing that confused me a little bit when I was writing the book is that Margaret's diary entries, she writes them in the third person. So she writes her diary almost as if she's writing a novel about herself, where she's the protagonist.
Which I loved. P.S. I just thought that was brilliant. I was like, oh my gosh. And can't you just imagine this girl who's going through all these like really angsty sort of things in her life, like writing this novel about her life. I thought it was very
almost like, I don't know if anyone else did this when I was in high school, going through like a really angsty time. You're like imagining that like you're in a movie and there's like sad music and there's like flames coming down the windows.
Yes.
You're the protagonist. Sorry, I got off on a tangent and I forgot.
Just there are two different voices and how you kept this straight.
Yeah. So one thing I did is like write all of Margaret's entries separately. So I had some real time where I got to know Margaret and I kind of dealt with her entire story at once. And that was really helpful in keeping them separate. But I mean, in reality, they are really different personalities. So they do have this love of language in common, but Lex is kind of like gruff in a way that Margaret is not. So in that sense, it was pretty easy to keep them separate.
Well, and I think they have very different upbringings too. I mean, they're definitely, their personalities are definitely informed by, their lives in a lot of ways, which we learn a lot more about as the book goes on.
And I think that they're actually both informed by their version of Memphis too, because Margaret is kind of informed by like the 80s, 90s version of Memphis, where Lex has like a totally different experience of growing up in Memphis.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I'm sure. I mean, it's a very, very different city during those two times, which you definitely, address really well. So I know, I mean, even if I didn't know this, even if I didn't know anything about you, if I had read this book, I would know that, books and stories are very, very important to you beyond the fact that you're, a writer of them. So can you tell us, like, what have books meant to you in your life?
Is it too dramatic to say books are everything?
It's not too dramatic at all. You've come to the right place to say that.
I feel like, this is good therapy for my love of books. But I think I was always the kid who was like trying to read books like at the family dinner table, like in class, like hiding them under like the desk where it like went in for like where you could put your books, like reading. I think that, for people just in general, like books have always been a place to come home to, a place to think about things and imagine your life in a safe environment. That's one thing I always love about novels, is that they let you try on different lives and kind of step into someone else's shoes. But then once you shut the book, then you can kind of step away. So yeah, I'm a huge reader. I love books. I will always love books. And I probably own way too many of them.
Oh my gosh, me too. It's so terrible. We moved recently and I had these like floor to ceiling bookshelves. And my husband was like, you have got to start getting rid of some of these books. Once you read them, like we're going to drown in books. And I was like, well, these are the ones I haven't read.
I mean, if you're going to drown, you might as well drown in books.
Right. I mean, it's a good thing, right? Yes, I'm with you. So would you consider, if someone said to you, are you a reader first or a writer first? What would you say?
Oh gosh. I don't know. It's so hard to say. I think I write and read for different reasons. I write definitely to process things for myself.
Me too.
And as a reader, I think I read to escape. I definitely come to the page when I'm ready to kind of like dive in. What about you? Are you a writer?
Oh, I love that. I mean, that is so well said. I'm not sure that I would have been able to put it that well, but I think that is so true. I definitely read to escape. And I think even writing fiction, even writing about completely different people and completely different experiences, it really does make you process your own feelings about things in a way that sometimes feelings about things that you didn't even know you had feelings about, which I think is so interesting. Well, and I think with you too, I mean, I have a background in journalism, but I've done some journalistic work, but certainly not in the way that you have. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what is your background like? And I mean, working for the New York Times, like that's the dream, right? That's amazing. And so how do you balance that, like your career with your novel writing?
It's not the easiest. So for the last year or so, I was working on the coronavirus coverage. Yeah. So I will say that it was a great thing to, at the end of the day, be able to kind of like dive into a world where the coronavirus was not a thing. Yeah. And I could just like be in Memphis I actually had to move my book back a year because I had started it kind of set in 2020. So it was going to run right into the coronavirus.
Too. Yeah.
I had to move it back. So for my job, my expertise is in data and graphics. So it's quite different than writing. So I have done my fair share of journalistic writing, but it's not what I mainly do now. Which I think is helpful. When I was writing kind of all day at my day job as a journalist and then writing all night and all weekend, it got to be really confusing and overwhelming, but
yeah, it's a lot of words.
Lots of words. Yes. So now I've got some numbers thrown in. So
yes, words and numbers. I mean, that's pretty great. You can use like both sides of your brain. Not everyone can do that. So I have heard from a mutual friend of ours that you had a literary themed wedding.
Oh gosh. Yes.
We're like way off track on the book here, but I feel like you're going to do 100 of these and everyone's going to ask you the same questions over and over again. So I'm trying to, make this one a little different for you, but you have to tell us about this wedding and what inspired that theme.
My husband and I both love books. So we decided to do a literary themed wedding. My dear mother hand wrote a page of Pride and Prejudice on like a huge backdrop that we used as a camera backdrop. And all the tables had famous couples and vintage books. I rated all the vintage bookstores in Atlanta and around Atlanta. And we had some things from our ceremony from books. So I don't know, I love books through and through.
So that's amazing that you found another book lover. So y'all really are going to drown in books then.
We really will. Although pretty much all his books are about war. So it's very easy to tell.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, do you read together? Like, do you read the same books or do you read different things?
We've tried, but it's honestly really hard to find a book that we both like together. I will say one thing that I do is that if I can't sleep one night, I have him read his book to me because it's so boring. It's like all about the kings and queens in Europe from the 1600s. And I'm just like immediately asleep. But everyone has their own taste.
No, they do. It's so hard. It really is. My husband and I haven't updated my bio. Clearly our son's 9 now, but I was talking about what we were going to read this summer and we're reading My Losing Season by Pat Conroy. And it's so great. Yeah. Like it's like one of the few books that everyone in our family really likes. I love it because it's Pat Conroy's language and beautiful prose, although I really couldn't care less about the basketball, but they love the basketball and are like super into it. So I was like, this is like the unicorn book that we all really like. This is amazing. This never happens.
Yeah, I need to find that with my family.
Yes. So speaking of that, what have you been reading? Like what has gotten you through the pandemic? Do you find yourself like drawn to lighter things? Have your tastes changed at all?
I usually kind of ricochet between darker things and lighter things. Okay. So I've been doing the same during the pandemic. There was a period where I was definitely reading lighter things. Mm-hmm. In terms of lighter things, one of the books that I loved that was a romance and kind of very light and very sexy, be warned, was How to Fail at Flirting by Denise Williams. I loved that book. And then in terms of I really enjoyed kind of diving deep into books that were extremely well written, just because I could kind of think about the sentences and not think about life in general, I guess. So like Read It Alone by Jacqueline Woodson. I loved that. Such a fun age. I just finished Detransition Baby, which I loved. And of course, Under the Southern Sky. And I finished Surviving Savannah, which was so good by Patty Callahan Henry. I will say it made me feel glad that we're living during a pandemic where I can be vaccinated instead of on a shipwreck.
Yeah, where there's like really no way out. Yes, it does put things into perspective. That's true. Were there any books that you drew inspiration on for this story? I don't think I said that correctly, but you know what I mean.
I do. So it's interesting because my first book, I drew a lot of inspiration from Prince of Tides by Pat
Oh,
Conroy, because that's
awesome.
like a sibling story.
Yeah.
My first book was really a sibling story
Mhm,
where kind of one of the siblings was kind of mentally unstable,
mhm.
just like in Prince of Tides.
Yeah.
So for this book, kind of the first spark of the idea came from Swimming Lessons by Claire Fuller. She's one of my favorite authors, and I loved that book. It also has letters that are left kind of in a house by her late mother, and she's kind of like reading them and getting to know her late mother while she's visiting this house where books are just like stacked and stacked and stacked. It's like this decaying seaside house. Highly recommend that book.
Oh, I can like see the cover in my head. I haven't read that book, so I'm glad. I will definitely do that. I'll add it to my
Recommend it.
very large list. Okay, I'm going to move in. I have some other questions for you too, but I want to make sure that we get to all of our reader questions. So I'm just going to kind of filter some of them in really quickly. Doris Fiddix, hi Doris, wants to know, did you have to cut anything out of the book that you thought should have stayed? That's a good question.
I didn't. That is a good question. I will say my editor is fantastic and she isn't too prescriptive, but the book is pretty short. I didn't really have to cut a whole lot. I think that coming from a journalistic writing background, journalists typically write short. We're trained to write short.
Yeah.
So typically my first drafts are short and then I kind of have to add to it. That's my problem is normally adding, not cutting.
Okay, that's really interesting. I like that perspective. Okay, so Anissa Armstrong, hi Anissa, says, very excited to continue listening to this book later tonight. What does a typical writing day look like for you? Oh, she has a bunch. Okay, so that's the first one. What does a typical writing day look like for you?
Well, since I have a full-time job, I don't know if I really have a typical writing day. I kind of like fit it in when I can and when I have the energy to do it. So at the beginning of 2020, I wrote a lot of this book when I was on leave, like book leave from my job, which it's great that they have book leave at the New York Times. And there I would kind of try to go on like a creative date with myself once a week, a la Julie Cameron.
I love that.
I would try to do some like yoga and journaling. It was a great life for those 2 months.
Sounds pretty great. I like failed really, really miserably at that. I am like a creative, I am an artist way flunky, but I do realize like this weekend, I really like took some time to actually just like be on the beach, be with my family, be with my friends, like not think about my book, you know? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like a person again. This is amazing. Oh, this is why we're supposed to do this. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's a struggle, but it's crazy how human you can feel when you just set down your phone.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I don't have anything attached to me. How great. Anissa also wants to know, what is your favorite snack while writing?
Can I say wine? Wine? I think it's
wine is an excellent writing snack.
Yeah, I think it's wine. I'm trying to think of another one. No, I can't.
I can't write and eat, you know, like I need to like but you know, you can pick up your wine or your coffee or whatever. So it's, you know.
Right.
Okay. And then Anissa says, what is the main point that you want your readers to take away from this book?
I think it's just that family can be anything that you choose. So it doesn't have to be the family that you're born with or your blood family. You get to choose your family and you get to choose the people that you go on this crazy journey we call life with. And that's beautiful.
I love that. Okay, Julia Carpenter says, I'm so curious about the way you've changed or evolved or adjusted your writing process since book one. What was different or similar or fun to discover?
Yeah, I think that the writing of this book was a lot less chaotic. So I don't know if you experienced this with your first book, Kristy, but I just didn't know what I was doing with my first book. So it took me a long time to kind of get to the story. And I had to do a lot of editing. So I think this book came out a lot cleaner on the first draft and required less editing, which was great. And it also felt a lot less chaotic while I was writing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to like dive in and like, no, my first book just came right out. It was perfect.
There are people who say that. And
no, I know. No. No. I think there's so much that you're learning along the way, even if you're a writer. I mean, even if you're someone that writes, I mean, to be able to put together something that's much bigger than what you've ever done before, it's a completely different thing. And I think you learn something every time you write a book. I really do. Brianna Crowell wants to ask, now that you've explored cities in North Georgia, a bit of New Orleans and Memphis through your first 2 books, do you have any ideas of where you might want to set your next book?
Oh, I don't know. I think it would be hard to imagine leaving the South, but I do live in Hoboken, so I could definitely see like part of a book being set in Hoboken. And that city has really interesting history too, just like a really deep history with Italian immigration. It was like one of the first stops where World War II, people shipping out to World War II would go. So I would love to dig into the history of that one too.
That sounds great. Susie Baldwin wants to know, what was your favorite book as a child?
I've asked my mother this, and she claims that it was the Bible. So I feel the need to reiterate this to the audience.
Look at you. That's impressive.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but I loved Noah's Ark, which feels kind of evil, honestly, for a child. Like everyone's dead. I don't know. Or maybe it's hopeful. I'm not sure.
You probably liked it's a perfect animals, it's rainbows, it's, a big boat. What could be more fun? It's an adventure.
But
it's, there are pros and cons.
Yeah, pros and cons. Yeah. I loved American Girl books as well.
No,
definitely in that era.
Did you have an American Girl doll or multiple?
Oh, I had several. I also loved Harriet the Spy, which the writer of that is from Memphis. Fun fact.
I love that. What was your first American Girl doll? Do you remember?
I think it was Kirsten or Kit.
Mine was Samantha. I pined for her. I thought she was like the most beautiful doll in the whole world. Susie also wants to know, what was your favorite book as a teenager?
I loved the books. I think it's Ellen Hopkins, which is like crack. It's like really angsty books written in verse. I loved those books. I also loved the Princess Diaries books, like Princess in Waiting, and I loved Meg Cabot.
Yeah, she is great. I got to hear her speak one time, and I was like so enamored with her.
What were your books, Kristy, as a teenager? I want to know.
Oh my gosh, so many. But I think my favorite book ever that I first read as a teenager was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I love it. I've reread it every year since then. But gosh, I read everything, but I'm trying to think what I really liked to read as a teenager. I read a ton all the time. Oh, I loved Sweet Valley books. Probably not as a teenager. I was probably a little younger than that. And I was definitely the Babysitter Club.
I loved the Babysitters Club.
Yeah. We wanted to have our own Babysitters Club. But of course, I think when you're reading Babysitters Club, you're probably a little bit too young to babysit in actuality. So
yeah.
Brant Mole says, it looks like you wrote most of this book during the pandemic. What kept you motivated during these trying times?
A deadline that apparently they can sue you if you don't meet. Honestly, that was a great motivator.
It's a good motivator. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I will say I had the first draft. I had a complete draft before the pandemic, which was very important. But yes, the threat of the looming deadline is very helpful.
There's no feeling as good though as having that first draft, because you're okay, no matter what happens, I have something to turn in. And my editor might be well, this is terrible, but at least it's a book and it exists.
Yes, it has a beginning, middle, and end. There's characters.
They're characters. Hopefully there's some development, maybe not. We'll see. Hi, Megan. All right, Megan wants to know, love the cover of your book. Can you talk a little bit about the process to create the cover and how involved you were in the process?
Yeah, so I was fairly involved in the process. This is actually our second cover. So the first cover was a little bit more, I kind of want to say classically Southern, it was more kind of like a woman with a lace dress. If you've read the book, Lex would never wear a lace dress. Maybe she would wear black goth makeup as a
Yeah.
high schooler. And I did want it to kind of feature one of like the sites of Memphis. So that's how we ended up with the Victorian house. And just like my first book, it has some beautiful florals on the front, which I love. So yeah, I love where we ended up with the cover, but I will say that as a writer, I think one of the shocks to me was that you're not like as involved with the way your book enters the world as like I would have thought. I don't know if you.
Oh my gosh. No, but I remember with Dear Carolina, my first book, like the book was set on a farm and they asked me all these questions about the title. And then they sent me this cover that was a girl on the beach. And I was like, well, there's no beach in the book. And they were like, but we really think this is the right cover. And I was like, oh, okay. And I had to like go write a beach in the book. I mean, it was crazy.
Oh gosh.
They didn't say go write a beach in the book, but I was like, I can't put out a book with a beach on the cover and no beach, right? How do you do that?
I also did not come up with the title, and I love the title where we ended up with the title too.
Okay, well, and that was Whitney's question. What was the process like for deciding on a title?
Yeah, so it was hard. I'm not good with titles, so I turned it in with the title Untitled. And then I thought I was being really funny. So because my first book is How to Bury Your Brother, I titled this one How to Bury Your Mother as a joke. And my editor didn't think it was that funny. So she came up with this title and we went through a lot of like Memphis related titles.
Yeah.
But I love that this one kind of plays with Lex's love of language.
Me too. Yeah, I think it was the perfect title for this book. And titles are hard. I completely agree with you. And I'm doing a title situation right now. And
I think a lot of the ones that had Memphis in it, I was almost like afraid someone would think it was a biography of Elvis.
Right. Or it's like Walking in Memphis. Like there are too many, I think there's so many like notable things that you think of, and then no one can remember it because they're like, oh wait, it was something about Memphis, but there's so many things that come to mind about Memphis. Yes, exactly. Okay. And so Doris, you answered that. Wants to know, did you choose the title before, during, or after writing it? And it was after.
I will say it's hilarious if you Google it, especially since today is the pub day. So there's not that much stuff in Google. Yeah. Some of what comes up is like people trying to learn how to have a Southern accent, which I think is hilarious.
Okay. Well, you'll like this. So I have a book called The Secret of Southern Charm, and, they had me do a video teaching people how to speak Southern, and it was hilarious. It was
what's your tip, Kristy? Give me
it was all about, so we were like at the studio and they were, people were in the studio and they were throwing me Southern phrases and I had to explain them. Like they were like little known Southern phrases. And they loved it so much. It ended up being like in Target on the Jumbotron. And I was like, I can't go watch that. Like, but it was funny. It really was. It was really funny. And they did all these crazy graphics. And you know, it's a very special skill to be able to speak Southern. You got to do it right. So that makes me, we have a couple more questions in here, but this is a question from me to you. Have you listened to your audiobook yet?
I have not. I'm scared to, honestly.
Will you listen to it? I
don't think so. Do you listen to your audiobooks?
Okay. So no, I never had until, I was writing The Secret of Southern Charm, and it was the second book in a series. And I thought, I obviously have to go back to the first book in the series just to be absolutely dead certain that I got every thread that I needed to pull through. But the idea of reading the book once it was finished just horrified me. And I was like, I know I'm going to find a million things and every sentence I'm going to want to change. And so I was like, well, maybe if I listen to it, like I can get the idea, but I don't have to like actually read the sentences again. And it's kind of cool. I actually sort of recommend it because I feel like it's a different experience of your own story, because someone else is, I mean, even though they're reading your exact words, they're performing it in a way. So it's kind of neat. I mean, I don't know. That said, I still haven't listened to Under the Southern Sky. So
I did go back and forth quite a bit this time with the audiobook narrator because the diary entries, they have some cross outs. Like when Margaret is thinking of the right words to say, she's like crossing out words. So we went back and forth some on how to do that. So yeah, maybe I will listen to it. I have some audiobook listeners in my life. So last time I just asked them how it was and they said it was great.
That's good. That's always a good thing to do. Yeah. I saw someone at the pool this weekend and she said it was great. So I was like, okay, good. Well, good. Check. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, William Parker says, did you have to study certain subjects to better understand and represent Memphis culture?
Yeah, so I did a lot of research on Memphis, kind of like Memphis history, current day Memphis. I also did a lot of research on linguistics. And I actually had a fact checker from Memphis State check both my linguistic references and my Memphis references to make sure that they were right, which was an amazing find to find someone overlapping on those two things.
I mean, yeah, that was really great. Patrick Sipe wants to know, were there any lessons you learned from your first book that you brought into your second?
I think I learned some things about what works best for my writing process. So something that was really effective the first time around was to kind of put all my scenes on index cards and organize them all over the floor of our apartment. So I did do that again. Yeah, I think I learned a lot with my first book. So I definitely took it all into the second book, and I think it helped a lot.
That's great. And on those same lines, William Parker says, how difficult was writing this versus How to Bury Your Brother, and how long did each take you?
How to Bury Your Brother took me like 2 or 3 years, so a lot more. And this took me 1 year, and I actually wrote most of it in just like 6 months. So definitely a lot faster for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've learned so much between the two. Okay. So this is awesome. I'm looking at our time. We're around. So Kat wanted, I have to read this comment because this is really fun. She said that they have hosted 2 small but amazing bookstore weddings at Novel,
Amazing.
which I think is so cool. And I know we have that really fun giveaway. I wish that I was eligible for that because I would have really, really been excited about it. But I was going to say we could bring her back on and listen to find our winner.
Well, that was so much fun. It's like great to watch an event where there's such a natural rapport and so much to talk about. And I really enjoyed the conversation so much, especially the Memphis Club. That didn't bother me at all. Okay, so, you know, I could have like spent the time I was away cutting up little names and putting them in a hat to draw them out, but
you should have done that.
Actually done that before and felt really dumb about it because there's this thing called the random number generator.
That's what I use.
And so I drew the random number of 38 and I counted down and found that the 38th person is, I lost her name, but I'll remember it when I see it. It's a lady. Marla Martinson.
Yay, Marla!
Congratulations. It's a great prize pack. You can see it. I meant to point it out before we started talking, but there are just some really cool little vendors in there. Some locally made tea, some honey, some barbecue sauce, a really, really beautiful hand-fired ceramic mug. Anyway, it's lots of fun. Marla, I have your email address in the Zoom registration so I can contact you about getting that to you. Congratulations. We've been really excited. And thank you again to Sourcebooks Landmark for providing this prize pack. It was super fun. All right, well, thank you, ladies. This was a great conversation, a great way to start the week. You know, it's a like post-holiday weekend, so everyone feels like real cranky to get back to business on Tuesday. I did, I know, and this ended on a high note. Yes. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you so much to Kristy.
Oh, thank you. And I just want to say to everyone, definitely pick up Learning to Speak Southern. It's an amazing book. You're going to need to read it this summer while you're, you know, on the beach or whatever you're doing, and it's wonderful. And it's definitely so great if you can support Novel, because we need our bookstores that we can walk in and sign books and peruse. And so y'all don't miss out on it. It's a great book and you're going to love it. I know I did.
And Novel will have signed book plates as well, which are super adorable.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yay. There you go.
You can order, you can come in and get one. You can order online or call us and get curbside pickup. We do it all these days. And both of you, I hope you'll come to Memphis when possible.
Absolutely.
Lindsey, even if your next book is not set here, we're going to need you to talk Memphis with us a little. Kristy, you've been here before, and like Memphis loves Kristy, y'all.
Aw,
So we look forward to having
I love
them
Memphis.
both in our store in person.
Cannot wait. In person. And maybe we can even hug. Like, I don't want to go crazy, but
I hugged someone last weekend, y'all. I hate to confess this. Someone who I don't live with. Yeah. It's getting
it's a
crazy
big
out
day.
there.
It's a big day. All right. Well, thank y'all.
Thank
y'all.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
everybody. Take care.
Good night.